Okay, moving on. We're going to be in Genesis 32:25. Pastor Steve, Genesis 32. My question says this. When Jacob wrestles with Jesus, it says, and this is the NLT, when the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. But how could Jacob win and God lose? Jesus then says, your name will no longer be Jacob. The man told him, from now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. And then Genesis 32:28, further emphasizing the idea that God lost. So how is that possible?
Let me give you another passage. This is out of the book of Hosea, and Hosea is the book right after the book of Daniel. Let me read this to you. Chapter 12 and verse starting in verse 2. The Lord also brings a charge against Judah and will punish Jacob according to his ways, according to his deeds he will recompense him. He took his brother by the heel in the womb, and in his strength he struggled with God. Yes, he struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought favor from him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spoke to us. And so that gives you a little bit more insight into what's happening there in Genesis chapter 32. When you get to the end of that wrestling match, Jacob is weeping at that point. And usually if you're the winner, you're not weeping. And so when I go through and read this with that passage in mind, it goes like this. Then verse 24 of chapter 32, it says, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what's your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you've struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. And then the story goes on. So basically what you have is you have this back and forth between the angel, who turns out to be Jesus, because later on he says that I've seen God face to face. He's got this back and forth with the Lord. And you got to remember what's happening here. Jacob's brother Esau is on his way. And so Jacob's coming back into the land of Canaan. He's actually on the Jordanian side of the Jordan River. He's coming back into the land of Canaan, and he's got guys who are scouts going ahead of him, and some of them come back and say, hey, your brother Esau's coming, and he's coming with 400 men. Well, at that point, Jacob realizes what's going on, and what had happened last time when they had parted 20 years before. Esau had told him, next time I see you, I'm going to kill you. And so, Esau hears Jacob is coming, and so he gets 400 guys together, and he goes up to meet him. There's not a lot of reasons that you would take 400 guys with you. And so one of the major reasons is you're either going to go kill your brother, or you're going to totally intimidate him. Well, one of those two things is going on. And it might have started off with killing, but obviously when you get to the next chapter, God changes this guy's heart. Anyway, what Jacob does is he takes his family and he splits them up. And so he takes the wives that are like the least and he puts them out in front, and he takes the wife that he likes the most and he puts her in the back, and then he crosses the river. She's on the other side of the river, and that's where this whole thing takes place. And so the Lord comes to Jacob, and this is Jacob being broken before God. And so the Lord comes to Jacob, and we're not told what the conversation was about. There was a conversation that was going on, and what God wanted to do was break the man, and the guy would not be broken. And so he's fighting with the Lord, and he's fighting with the Lord all night long. And so it turns into a wrestling match on some kind of level. And then the Lord says to Jacob, the sun's coming up. I got to go. And it's not because the Lord's afraid of the sun. It's because Jacob has an appointment, and the appointment is with his brother Esau, and 400 guys. And so the Lord's making the point there, you're on your own, Bucky, and I'm leaving. And Jacob, at that point, locks on to him, and he says, I will not let you go. And so what the Lord does is he reaches down, and he touches the side of Jacob's hip, and his hip comes out of joint. Now, I've never had that happen to me, but I've known some people that have had some hip problems, and it's one of the most painful things that you can go through. And so it's at that point that Jacob would hit the ground. And what Hosea chapter 12, verse 4 lets us know that is that he's hit the ground, and he's got a lock on the Lord's legs, and he's weeping at this point, and he's saying, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. And Jacob is at the end of his rope. He knows that it's all about to come down on him and on his whole family, and there's nothing that he can do about it. And so all he's got is the Lord at this point. And so God busts Jacob up. And so, no, Jacob did not win.
He walked for a limp the rest of his life.
Right, exactly. From this point on, you see the guy with a staff. He's walking with a limp for the rest of his life. And so what you have here is the breaking of Jacob, and finally Jacob coming to the end of himself and becoming somebody who's totally and completely dependent upon God. And that's the whole idea behind, I will not let you go unless you bless me. I need your blessing. I need you to be the one who's behind me. I need you to be the one who takes care of me and my family. I'm not going to live out the day if you don't. That's the idea behind this whole thing. And so Jacob is a broken man here. He's not sitting there, raising his fists up in victory at the end of the whole thing. He's got to crawl away when the Lord walks away here. And so what God does is he changes his name, which indicates a change of nature. And that's exactly what you see through the rest of the book of Genesis. Jacob is not the same conniving, sneaky guy that he was before. He's still got his issues, but he's a guy who has given his heart over completely to the Lord, and God has just totally and completely changed him. And so the name Israel means a prince who has power with God. And that's the idea behind that. And the way that Jacob prevailed was by clinging to the Lord's legs and weeping. That's how you prevail with God. You cling to the Lord and you weep.
It's a good picture.
Yeah.
All right, so before then, and Jacob, he's flaky in many different areas, but I appreciate the zeal to be able to wrestle with the Lord. It's like you're just like, all right, let's go. And you're going to take on the Lord, you know what I mean? And wrestle with him until he knocks your hip out of place. It's like, yeah. All right, that's some boldness. I can appreciate that.
Yeah, generally, when people are talking about this, they're talking about wrestling and prayer. And, from my experience, I'm a Jacob kind of guy. And I wasn't conniving or that kind of stuff, but I was self-reliant. And God would not let me do that. He ended up breaking me of my self-reliance. And what I thought was that I have to accomplish things as a Christian. I have to do these things. And so I'm a list guy. Give me a list. I'll go and complete the list for you, Lord, and I'll be a good Christian. And that does not work. And God doesn't want it to work, and he doesn't allow those kind of things. I had a Jacob moment when I was out of high school. I went to a JC for college, and the reason I went was because I wanted to play football. And it was one of those things where I knew I should pray about it, and I didn't want to because I wanted to play football. And that was just it. And the whole time that I'm doing, you start working out with the team in the summer and that kind of stuff, and that whole time, God's in the back of my head going, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Worst football season ever. I did have some fun, but I got hurt a bunch. And then at the end of the season, God let me go through the season. I'm playing sandlot football, and a guy, we said no hitting below the knees. And what did a guy do? He came in and hit me below the knee. And I've had problems with my left knee ever since that point. He took out my ACL. And so, as soon as it happened, I was like, God, that's you, isn't it? Because he didn't want me playing. He had other plans for me.
Yeah.
And so I've walked with a limp ever since then. And so I get Jacob.
Totally.
Totally, yeah.